This program is part of the Infinite Potato Alliance. Visit us at infinitepotato.com.
I'm Shane Thomas and this is Analysing Doctor Who. I'm joined by Jan Fennick and Chris Kocher, and we're here to analyse the very first two episodes of the new series of Doctor Who, Space Babies and The Devil's Chord. Because they were so kind, Disney, to give us two at once, we'll be analysing two at once. And if you have any thoughts on the stuff we'll be talking about here, or anything else Doctor Who based, you can email us at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com. That's analysing, spelled with an S. So I come to you first, Chris, just number out of 10. What was your rating for Space Babies?
I said 6.
Okay, Jan, yours?
I would say 7.
Okay, I'm also giving it a 7. And then Chris, I'll come to you for your score on The Devil's Chord.
I said 7.
Okay, Jan, yours?
8.5.
Okay, and I'm giving it a 6. And Jan, over the two episodes, if you just give me the thing or the theme from it that you like the most.
I would say I actually really like the music battle between the Doctor and Maestro, even though it was very reminiscent of a recent Marvel Cinematic Universe film.
And Chris, what from these did you like the most?
I'm an old school fan. I really liked all of the references to the past. You know, we talked about Time Lords and Gallifrey, and, you know, there were echoes of scenes that we'd seen in Series 1 with Christopher Eccleston back in the day. And I mean, he talks about the Doctor and Susan being across town, and I just loved all that. I'm nerdy that way, so I really appreciated all those ideas from the past.
Yeah, well, another reference is visual one. I mean, is the finale of Tennant's first series, Series 2 in Doomsday.
Yep.
When Rose and the Doctor are both hanging about to be sucked into oblivion, which I always read as a deliberate reference, as the Doctor's almost thinking of what happened that time in terms of what happens this time in Space Babies. Thing I actually like the most from this, and this is over both episodes, is the Doctor alluding to traumatic things and also in serious moments. So for most of this, in both episodes, Ncuti, I think as we expected, very loud, very energetic, very smiley, bouncing everywhere. But with scenes like early on when he says he's the last of the Time Lords.
Okay, so back to the planet.
My world is called Gallifrey.
Gallifrey? And where's that?
Gone! Ruby, it's gone. It's gone. They died. It was a genocide and they died. So the one that was adopted was the only one left? I am the last of the Time Lords.
And he explains like how intense the experience of the bi-generation was, which seems to indicate that could be a one-off. Even the scene when he's looking to find the cord to banish Maestro, that scene in particular, Ncuti holds the lens. It's really well shot, but Ncuti holds the lens so well. For someone that does seem to be leaning at this stage between high energy, he's incredibly powerful when he's actually still and silent. You need to have a really good presence to be able to pull that off. So it contrasts so well. There is I don't think it's an accident, contrast between loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet. And when he goes quiet, I think probably because it's not often, but when it does happen, I find it resonates very strongly. And that over the two episodes, I was just like, oh, yeah, this is good. Not that I was surprised, but we've all had this when it's a new Doctor, a new showrunner, a new era of the show. We're like, okay, how's this going to work? How's this going to go? This is something for two episodes that I'm like, you just, as a fan, I feel as a fan, I just settled into my seat. I was like, oh, I'm liking this. We are on very safe ground here. This is something I'm sure we'll see more of, and I look forward to seeing more of. Very, very positive. And, Jen, if we now transition into what from these episodes we like the least.
Over both episodes, I would say the lack of internal logic. I like the stories overall, and I mean, I sat there, especially during Space Babies, and kept screaming. I was laughing, going, this is so stupid, but I was enjoying it. But the problem is that the lack of internal logic for either story, in terms of how it works, what was working, why the babies were, 6 years old and still babies. I mean, the question is asked, and instead of like, even if it was technobabble, we just sort of pivoted to the lovely, lovely speech of nobody grows up wrong, which is fine. But there's still the question of why is this? And I just felt like a lot of it in both stories, it didn't make any sense. And I think that's Russell in particular, that a lot of times he just like goes and, the story is what the story is. And he kind of wanders around and has the scenes he wants, but he doesn't actually think about how does this actually work, and kind of gelling it all together. Because if you sit there and like think about it for 10 minutes, like what is going on here? It doesn't quite make sense. And the second one, I'd say the same thing, because there's no music from 1925 to 1963 or 1926 to 1963. Then why are there recording studios? Why are there people actually recording? Why is George Martin a music producer? Why do we have an orchestra? It's like all that stuff. None of that makes sense. And it's a cool concept. And Jinx was brilliant. I love Maestro. I love the whole feel of it, but again, the internal logic and how these things work just makes no sense. And and Russell's been saying in interviews, well, it's fantasy, therefore it doesn't have to work the way science fiction does, blah blah blah. But that's not true. In fantasy, you still have to have rules on how things work, whether how your magic works, fairies or your elves or whoever, how their cultures work, how things work. And he just sort of seems to like do it on the fly and never quite gels for me, and that frustrated me a lot, because I think both stories would have been stronger if there had actually been some consistency and some building blocks behind it.
To kind of think about your point, I mean, on the why the music studios, the impression I was getting, or the impression, I think it was, what it was is that music isn't dead, but it is dying, and it's at this point, it exists, but it's almost pointless existing, which is why music is so terrible. So there's an industry of sorts, but music isn't really worth existing, and it's probably something that will gradually die out, which is when we get to the vision of the future, that the apocalyptic vision of the future. That said, I agree. I don't think that was made very clear. Like, that wasn't something that's easily understood, which is to the fault of the storytelling. And I definitely agree with your point, actually, regarding the music battle, because I get the internal logic of the battle, but I didn't understand why we had it for the purpose of the story that was being told. It didn't feel like this is how we stop this person. I get the means, but what's like the end? That didn't actually make sense, particularly because then Jinx just like conjures some notes. It's like, okay, she's weaponizing notes, but conjures some notes and then just lassos Ruby and the Doctor. And I watched it myself, and I went to my friends and we rewatched it later on the Saturday. And one of my friends said, "Is it happening? Why didn't she just do that from the start?" She being Maestro, and it was like, fair. Like, why didn't she just, if she can do that, why just not do that from the start? And the whole thing, even about when the Doctor's slowly trying to find the Devil's Chord, and I don't know, you could argue Maestro's like, I don't think you can do it, so I'm gonna let you have a go anyway. But when it looks like it's gonna happen, it's like, so Maestro's just gonna lie there and cackle and just let this happen? Like, those kind of things, to your point about internal logic. Because then, as viewers, we're sitting there saying, wait, what? And now we're not immersed, and we're not engaged with the story, we're not enjoying the story, because we're asking questions. We shouldn't be asking questions. We should all be asking questions after, not during, because then you're not being taken on a journey. So I do agree with your general point about internal logic. Chris, we come to you and what you like the least.
All right, well, I know this has been harped on everywhere, but I know you're never going to find exact matches for four of the most famous faces in history, but could they not have found actors who looked more like the Beatles? Here's what I said to my wife while we were watching. One of my wife's coworkers used to be in a Beatles tribute band. He was a 50-year-old man in a mop top wig, and even he looked better than the guys that they chose for this episode. It just baffles me that somebody pointed out that John Lennon looks like Hair Flick from Hello Hello. Once somebody said that, I couldn't unsee it. I think the Paul McCartney guy looked like young Creed Bratton from the American version of The Office.
Oh, I kept saying he looked like Barry Wham from the Ruddles, because he does. John Halsey.
Oh, yeah.
John Halsey has this very broad face. And also, the thing that I found most distracting is Paul McCartney is known for his big hazel brown eyes, right? These big puppy dog eyes. And the guy who's playing Paul has these bright blue eyes. He's got this round face. He's not convinced. Yeah. I mean, Paul McCartney has a charm, especially in those days, and, you know, came across in everything. And he just wasn't charming. Even with the, well, you know, I'm just doing this so I can go back and, you know, get a job kind of thing. The John guy wasn't bad, and I think the actor's really good, and I'm looking forward to him in Dune Legacy, which is like the Dune prequel. And I think he pulled off John more. If I didn't, like, think about the fact that he doesn't look like John, or he didn't look like Ian Hart.
Again, they're like four of the most famous faces in history of the last 100 years. You know, and we don't even see George or Ringo enough to know if they look like George or Ringo. I'm sure you, Jan, I know you're the big George Harrison fan. I'm sure that was frustrating for you that George doesn't even, like, he's on the screen for about 45 seconds or less.
Right,
so,
and Ringo is like behind the drum kit. We barely see him at all.
Maybe they had a bigger role and it got trimmed down to that.
It didn't play as well as it could have.
I mean, what I will say is they made a great effort of, let me say it this way. They did very well considering that they couldn't include any Beatles songs. Yeah. They made the plot about the fact that there weren't any Beatles songs, which I thought was a pretty clever way to do it.
I think the thing about the Beatles is that they're there, but they're only kind of there as a way into one of the big themes of the story, which is about music more than anything else. And that leads me into what I like the least, and it's more of a socio-political point, and it's the wider cultural elision in the Devil's Chord, and the use, more specifically the non-use, of black cultural history and black music. So the setup is, basically, we've had no proper music for like 4 decades. Totally fine. But there has been zero reference to how this impacts the kind of inceptors and creators of this music. The path of black people just in the Western world, you can trace not just through music, you can trace the path of black people in capitalist countries through what they created in art and culture, but music's a big part of that. Now, what I'm not asking is you change a whole episode just to centre like what this means for black people, but you really hurt your episode when you don't even have just a stretch of dialogue where at one point the Doctor realises, oh my God, what's happened to music? Why is everyone playing so shit? How did this all happen? And the Doctor eventually realises what Maestro's done. And then you have to just have a quick explanation that, okay, so there's no blues, there's no soul, there's no R&B, there's no Motown, no hip-hop, there's no house, there's no drill, there's no grime, there's no Cab Calloway and Memphis Minnie and Diana Ross and Louis Armstrong and Prince and Janet Jackson and no Beyonce. And then you can transition that into Ruby. She had that monologue about, but I listen to Beyonce and Sam Fender and my mum sings Oh Danny Boy at Christmas when she's drunk and stuff like that. You can transition that very easily. And none of that is there. And I don't know, maybe it was written and got cut. Like, you should never address a history of popular music without addressing the history of black people, and specifically African Americans, because you don't get one without the other. Like, this was a very Back to the Future-esque approach regarding the history of black music, which I took a dim view of it in Back to the Future, and I take an equally dim view of it here. And the reason why it was so disappointing is because it was unnecessary. This isn't like, well, we couldn't do it because this. No, you can do everything the same. The story you're telling can be the same. You don't have to change anything. It can literally be 15 seconds of dialogue, just, oh my God, like, this has almost changed the history. Because they do acknowledge that, oh, what would a world be like that music? It'd be terrible, and that's fine. That aligns with everything they're trying to do. But you have to at least acknowledge that, oh, and all this music that came from all these black artists, and specifically as a result of this circumstances that African Americans in particular grew up in. The music is in part a response to white supremacy, and not always bleak. So not always like the blues. Sometimes it's a joyful rejoinder, and it's an assertion of self. And none of it's there. You usually wouldn't think any of that ever existed based around this episode. And there's no good reason to leave that out. That's just an L for Russell. That was part of the reason why I gave this episode a 6. Because I was waiting. I'm like, okay, so we're going to get the acknowledgement. We're going to get it. And it never happened. It never came along. And that's a miss.
I just realized the Doctor is playing the Maple Leaf Rag, which is written by Scott Joplin, who is black, and there's not even an acknowledgement of that. It's just like nothing.
I don't need a whole, I mean, I will talk about 4/4 breaking later, but I don't need to look to camera. Hey kids, let me tell you about the history of, like, I don't need that. We don't need that. That would be really bad. That'd be bad storytelling. But you do in the dialogue, and there's parts, if you watch the episode, there's parts in the dialogue where you can drop it in very easily and quite organically. And you move on with the adventure. So the fact that I wasn't there was, I found very frustrating. So Chris, if I come to you on Space Babies, and if you just give me one thing that stood out, one point you like to make about Space Babies.
All right, well, I'm going to say something that I never thought I would actually say, which is Russell is actually making something half decent out of the timeless child. I mean, really.
Agreed.
I mean,
Agreed.
you know, as someone who thought it was the way it was presented in the Chibnall era was terrible. They kind of just dropped it in there as a PowerPoint of here's the Doctor's life that we didn't know about. And then literally in the same episode, later in the episode, they say, well, this doesn't change anything. Russell is actually, would I prefer that he maybe just ignored the whole thing? Maybe. But to his credit, he's picking it up. And of course, the Doctor's going to mention that he's an orphan when he's relating to Ruby's life. I mean, it's a point that comes naturally from the characters and their situation rather than just wanting to say, here's a rewrite of the whole Doctor Who history and continuity that I'm just going to throw in there and it's going to make everybody mad, but it's not really going to change anybody's character and I'm not really going to utilize it to the fullest potential. Like I said, I never thought I would say it, but I kind of like it. It'll be interesting to see how far it goes or whether it's still just going to be a background kind of thing moving forward, but I kind of like it so far.
It's a plot point, and I think it's got to go further because there's too many, oh, my life parallels you, and oh, this is not a coincidence kind of thing. So I think we're going to hear more later on.
It's the way that it organically comes out of the characters now, like in a way that it never felt like it did in the Timeless Children episode and moving forward. It always felt like this kind of weird thing that now we know about, but we never really made it an active part of the character. And now it feels like we're actually trying to integrate it into the Doctor's character, which I kind of like that part.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he's still referring to himself as a Time Lord and that his home planet is Gallifrey, even though apparently now everybody's gone because not only did the Master kill everybody on Gallifrey, but there was some kind of cellular genocide all over the universe, which is new, but hey, we'll see where he goes with it.
Yeah, I mean, Russell, and I agree with in this episode, but Russell fixed it so quickly in the Christmas episode. They just look at Lulu Bell in the cot, and the Doctor goes, I'm adopted. Very casually. And it was like, oh yeah, that's how you frame it. You frame it as someone who's adopted. Yep. And now it becomes grounded and becomes easier to understand and becomes something that whether you are an adopted or not, you can now all of a sudden empathize and maybe resonate with. It literally just took that one twist to the left, 5 degrees, and all of a sudden it's something you can tell good stories with. Even if, I probably wouldn't have gone with that myself, but Russell's made something of it, where before it was like I wasn't like, oh, you've just killed the show, but it was like, oh, this isn't helping. This is going to be tough for people to write in the future, and Russell fixed it with one line. Jennifer, come to you on Space Babies.
I think the one thing that really stood out to me is the fact that Ncuti and Millie had such amazing chemistry together, and I thought they were great with the kids. And one of the things that I like about Doctor Who, and it's silly, I'm not a parent, they, on screen, it just glowed. It was absolutely adorable. And I was watching the episode and kind of going, oh my God, this is so silly, but then laughing and just kind of like getting a warm, fuzzy feeling about it.
So you lot grew up, but you stayed the same size. Baby size. Space babies.
But are we wrong?
What do you mean?
We're not meant to be like this. Did we grow up wrong?
Oh, Bobby. Oh, Popsicle. Look at me. Look at me. Nobody grows up wrong. You are what you are, and that is magnificent.
But Mummy and Daddy left us.
That's okay. Mine did too.
What happened?
Well, I was found.
Hooray!
It was really sweet. And he just picks her up and stuff. And the fact that the kids have never been hugged and he's suddenly hugging them. And there's something that kind of melted, my cold, dead heart. I'm not big on schmaltz, but Russell, any other issues I have with him in terms of storytelling, when it comes to emotional beats, I think he's really, really good. And it hit me. I really did feel that there was a connection there. And I really love Ncuti and Millie together. I think, they've said off screen that from the moment they met, they just kind of had this connection. They're best friends. It really works. And it does. You can really see it in every story that so far that they really kind of get each other and they work together so well. So, I think as a first episode, Space Babies has some issues, but that is one of the tentpoles of Doctor Who, is that the Doctor and the companion are friends and they have these adventures and this is their life. And I really feel that between the two of them.
That's mainly where I am. I mean, the baby scenes, it can be emotionally manipulative, but that doesn't mean it didn't work. And from what I can see, I think it's been a little bit polarizing. I think you're kind of in our camp, or some people did not like it at all. This is part of the reason why I gave it a 7, because I did like a lot of that stuff for a lot of the reasons like you've just stated. And yes, the idea of comforting abandoned children can be emotionally manipulative. And the response, I don't think anyone's right or wrong. I think it is just a very bypass the logical part of your brain. It's a very emotional reaction you have or don't have. And I think that probably determines whether you like the episode or not. The one that was in this that I'll point out is Russell T Davies did a lot of referencing of real world stories and issues in his first time as showrunner. And it seems that similar is happening here, because there is a couple of scenes that definitely allude towards parenthood and reproductive rights. And the first scene when they meet Jocelyn, Nanny.
So the planet down below will refuse to stop the babies being born, but once they're born, they don't look after them.
It's a very strange planet.
It's not that strange.
I don't really think the metaphor is subtle. It never is with Russell, but doesn't mean it's not relevant, doesn't mean it's not worth telling, doesn't mean it doesn't have power. And the issue of just damaged children, that's something that passes through, I think, both these episodes. The babies being abandoned, the doctor, Ruby.
There's also the refugee message in there, which feels like it's very UK-centric.
The 5th planet out, Mondu Karun. That's the Dubarry Duplessis world.
Oh, that's good. The Dubarry Duplessis is a star-wide organization. It means they can take in lots of refugees.
Oh, well, can't we call them for help?
They don't go fetch refugees. That's the fate of every refugee in the universe. You physically have to turn up on someone else's shore.
I mean, that could be a U.S. thing as well, obviously, with, the southern border and Mexico and all that.
The other thing I was going to say is about just on the point of refugees, and also at one point the doctor, when he's talking about Gallifrey, he says there was a genocide. I really think that also was there for Ncuti specifically, because anybody out there who doesn't know, Ncuti and his family escaped Rwanda when Ncuti was an infant because of the genocide and all the unrest that was going on in Rwanda, and they went to Scotland. I don't think that Russell was doing it to pander, but I think that was something that's important to Ncuti, that Russell seems to be talking to people and taking things in, like the thing with Davros. He said he spoke to Ruth Madley and some other people with disabilities and in wheelchairs. So he's trying to listen and learn and be a voice for other people, which I think is really good. And I definitely felt like that was like a nod to Ncuti in a good way. That the doctor actually knows these things. He's been through it, or the actor has.
So episode 2, Chris. If I come to you in episode 2 for you on Devil's Chord, if there's something that stood out to you on that episode.
The point I'm going to make circles back to something that Jan was talking about earlier about, internal logic and internal consistency of storytelling. I mean, there's an inconsistency from Space Babies to the Devil's Chord about how exactly changes in history occur. I mean, in Space Babies, Ruby kills the butterfly and immediately she's a lizard person or whatever she's supposed to be. But here, music is taken away in 1926, and yet she's basically unaffected through most or all of the episode. I do realize that the lizard person thing in Space Babies was just an easy, fun joke to do. Looked cool in the trailers and everything, but from one episode to the next, there's that wild swing where it just doesn't join up correctly. And I know, obviously, over the now 60 plus years that Doctor Who's been on the air, there's been different ways that's been handled, but it just seemed particularly jarring in back-to-back episodes to kind of have it be two seemingly totally different results to the same kind of action.
The only answer that I have for that, which might be not an answer, but after the whole butterfly thing happens and they go into the TARDIS, the doctor says, "Oh, new console, I forgot to turn on the butterfly compensator."
I literally just looked up while you were talking. It's the butterfly compensation switch, which is really something out of like the Batman shark repellent bat spray. But that does feel very much like for new fans watching time travel. What if you step on a butterfly? And it's like, okay, we're getting this out of the way right now, and we're doing it as a joke. Butterfly compensation switch done. Let's never talk about this again.
Right.
And therefore it answers any inconsistency in future about why things aren't affecting the companion. Aside from the fact you could say the doctor is like protecting her with time, or time heals itself, or whatever else they've used over the last 60 years to explain things.
Fixed points in time, things that have to happen versus things that can be smoothed over a little bit after, if you change little things.
Yeah, but it's a good point to make regardless, Chris, because you're right. And the other, just to tie in with you, and this is not my point either, is that because we had the 2 episodes back to back, in Space Babies, the doctor is afraid of things and we wonder what's going on here. And even he questions himself. And then it turns out that the bogeyman actually is emitting roars at a specific frequency that causes fear, which makes sense. But then in the next one, the doctor's suddenly running and hiding and terrified of Maestro and not standing up. And, oh, my God, my soul was torn in half. So therefore, apparently David Tennant is a Horcrux. But it's like suddenly he's afraid. And this is not the doctor either. And we don't quite get, and he's not questioning himself again. I think if that episode was not supposed to be, they were not supposed to be back to back, that was supposed to be later on in the thing, it might have made sense because Ruby says you're never afraid. And we know there's a time jump.
6 months, a 6 months time jump.
Yeah, it's weird because, suddenly the doctor is, and I've seen fans bitching and moaning online about how the doctor now is a coward and they're very upset about that. So I just thought that it was odd, because those 2 episodes were back to back. I think it sort of stood out. I
mean, I always felt it was because it was, Doctor was aware that was from the Toymakers Legions, and that was I remember what happened last time I faced this guy. One of their legions, oh God, not this again. Even though it is probably fair, how we feel about what we watched is somewhat influenced by the fact we are watching episodes back to back, which isn't really what we do in Doctor Who. That does probably affect, to an extent, it probably affected the writing process. But Jennifer, we come because you had your own point for The Devil's Chord.
I've been excited about this from the moment that they were announced, or she was announced, because Jinx has now changed her pronouns, her personal pronouns, as well as her performance pronouns, but just Jinx in general. I thought.
Sorry, what's it now? I thought it was she. Isn't it she?
Jinx is now. Jinx Monsoon, the character, the drag queen persona, has always been she. Hera Hoffer, who is the performer, is now she, because right before this episode came out, she did a couple of interviews and she's gone from being non-binary to trans femme. She's had facial feminization surgery. She's now on hormones. I've been a huge fan of Jinx since she walked into the workroom on RuPaul's Drag Race in season 5, which was 2013. I have seen her live. I love her in general. I knew what a kind of powerhouse she was, and she did not disappoint to me. So I think if nothing else, story logic, whatever, she is Maestro, stood out to me. And I know there are people who think she's over the top, but I got most of the references, including, I don't know if she or Russell mentioned the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but there's definitely an element of that because when she's going and saying, where are you? Where are you? And I just think she was wonderful. And the fact that the casting they were bold enough, brave enough to hire a drag queen for this role and make them a villain, make them basically the whole thing that this story hinges on, was just amazing to me and wonderful to me, because I like, we should have inclusion anyway, but the fact that, especially in the U.S., that there are so many people now that are terrified of drag performers and they're destroying children and this, that, and the other thing.
Not just in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, I think it's bled over to the UK now, too, because I know it's happening. I've seen it in the UK, but I just think that was a very bold stance for Russell to basically another FU to those people. And yeah, part of it is going to pull up some controversy, but I think it's good because that way people can see that she's a performer. She's an actor. She's playing a role. So I thought she was phenomenal. I'm really happy. And I know of a number of other drag queens who are huge Doctor Who fans, including Tia Coffey, who just won the latest international drag race show. And there are a couple others, including Pandora Box, who's American, who comes to Galley out of drag. She's a huge Doctor Who fan and huge nerd. And there's a lot of nerd culture in drag queen culture, and I think it's kind of cool because Russell is acknowledging it. I know he sees their shows, he likes them. So I like the fact that he's pulling that in too, because and again, it's just a brave statement to me, or bold statement that some people aren't going to like, and that's okay. We don't need them.
My thing about Maestro is that even though Maestro is not a he, to an extent, Maestro is a tech bro. I was listening to something recently, but Marnie Jones said and he was being slightly tongue-in-cheek, we said, it kind of feels these days in the world like everything is owned by like two people. Media, art, sports teams. Like everything is just kind of owned by like two people. Or a handful of people, and they just own and control everything. And Maestro in this, in terms of their whims, their aims to essentially seize and dominate and own music itself, an entity for their own ends, and no intention of sharing anything with anyone or distributing it in a way where everyone can get the benefits of it. And the irony of what I'm saying shouldn't be lost on anyone who's currently listening to this podcast on Spotify. but Maestro is just like, oh, you just want to take it all for yourself. Yeah, not even I own music, I am music. That capitalist mindset of devouring everything and never stopping.
And what's interesting is years ago, I mean, we're talking like 40 years ago when I was in grad school, it was business of television and film, and I had a professor who at the time said that in the future, at some point, there are only going to be two corporations that still exist. One will be Disney, and the other will be IBM, and they will own everything. Everything will be an umbrella corporation between two competing things. I mean, he was wrong about IBM, but he was pretty close with Disney. So, yeah, it ties into that, and just buying up all the media and all the stations and just everything. So it's kind of ironic that Disney is involved with it.
Yes, very much so. So, any other just additional observations that we haven't touched on yet?
I like the fact that we still have, even though we didn't see much of them in the last two episodes, that we saw Cherry and her mom's name. Carla, yeah. We didn't see a lot of them, but what little we did see of Carla and Cherry and the fact that they're mentioned enough. One of the things that I think Russell does really well, and he's doing it again, is doing the companion's family and sort of giving the doctor a little bit of a wider group of family or friends. It's not just the companion. You know, I'm a big Moffat fangirl, but Moffat basically, other than Amy and Rory and then River having each other along with the doctor, we met Amy's parents once and that was it. We met Rory's father once. We heard about his stepmother, but we never met her. You know, we heard something about Clara's family, but not really. You know, Bill had a stepmom she didn't get along with, or an adoptive mom she didn't get along with that much, and there was a longing for her mom. But the fact that Russell gives us family, he gives us, you know, especially mothers, fathers, grandfathers, in this case, an awesome grandmother, and gives us kind of family unit that the doctor will eventually fit into, even if, you know, he's causing trouble with the mums and the End of Space Babies, where he says, you know, tell your mom not to slap me. And, you know, those of us
I love that.
Those of us who watched the show before know exactly what that means. New people will be like, huh, what? But yeah, the fact that the family is there and the doctor sort of becomes this adoptive family member into this human family. And we're seeing it again. And that's something that I like a lot, because that's something, being an old school fan, back in the dark ages of the 70s and 80s, nobody had a family. Maybe you heard about an Auntie Vanessa, that and the other thing, but we knew nothing about anybody's families at all. And here we're getting, again, another family unit. And I think that's neat. So I'm really happy that Russell's doing that.
Okay, Chris, same thing, if I come to you and any additional observations.
My observations are more questions about what's going to come next. I mean, who's the one who waits? Will we see other members of the Pantheon this season? And why are we making Ruby into the new Impossible Girl? I mean, I know Millie kind of looks like a cross between Billie Piper and Jenna Coleman, but come on, do we really want to go this way again, where we turn the companion into a puzzle? I mean, there's even the part at the end of, the episode where he's got her outline up on the screen and it's scanning her. And do we really want to go there again? I reserve judgment until the end of the season and we figure out how it all pans out. But there's some interesting questions about what's coming up. And I just want to also mention my friend Irene that Jan knows. Irene had an interesting observation and I wanted to share that. She said, all I can say is that in some ways it isn't what I expected, but in other ways, it's very Russell T. Davies. And I think that's a good way to sum it up, that my interpretation is, he's writing a show in a new and different way, but he's still using some of the old tricks that we recognize for those of us who have been around long enough to remember Series 1 with Christopher Eccleston and some of those early things that are now being reflected in some of these new episodes. And it'll be interesting again to see how that continues or whether it will deviate off from that with other episodes coming up this season.
To add to your point also, Chris, just because it's something people on the internet have been talking about a lot, and I picked it up too. There's a woman named Susan Twist. There's an actress named Susan Twist who's been in 4 out of the 5 episodes that we've seen so far. She was in Wild Blue Yonder as Newton's housekeeper. She was in Church on Ruby Road. She's the woman who asks...
it's when a power cut hits, yeah, and it's like, turn it back on, yeah.
Yeah, she's in... I missed her the first time, but she's in Space Babies. She's the last of the three officers that we see on screen. And then she's in EMI. She's the tea lady behind the thing. And it's interesting is that she has an interaction with the doctor, but she purposely turns away when he turns towards her to pay her. And then she does not turn back to the screen until he's got his back to her. So we don't know what's going on, but she's also listed in the cast list for next week. So she is just some kind of tee-hee thing from Russell going on, or is she part of the bigger story that we don't know about either? In some ways, she's the new bad wolf.
Yeah, I would imagine we keep an eye on this, and I do agree with you, Chris, about the potential impossible girl. I wasn't a fan of that storyline the first time, but like you, let's be fair. Like, we don't know what we're judging yet, so let's see what we're judging before we start judging. I forgot to mention in terms of my this wasn't part of my observations, but it is now because Jan raised the point of when with the tea lady. And the tea lady tells us how much, I think it's a crown, how much the tea is. And the doctor's response...
2 cups of tea, my darlings. That's half a crown, tar very much.
How much? That is outrageous.
Take it or leave it, sweetheart.
That is daylight robbery.
Oh, that's me, Margaret Lockwood in The Wicked Lady. Now there was a woman. Statuesque.
That is one of the most British things that's ever taken place in Doctor Who in my life. Not the idea of being annoyed at the price of something, that's universal. But the specific phrase, how much? I cannot tell you. Anyone who's like worked in retail, anyone who's worked in retail knows that response. At some point in their life, you've had that response. How much is this? You say how much it is. And it's specifically those 2 words, how much, with the voice going up at the end. It's like 3 question marks. I cannot emphasize how specifically British that is as a response. I find it very funny because for a show that's like glowing global and people are saying, oh, it's going away from its British roots and stuff, and people, some certain types, I'm like, you could not have got more British in that response right there. Tremendous. Because the little things I wanted to add is, we didn't mention Ruby much. It's quite clear, and it's building on what we've seen before. She has a fierce, caring instinct. If you watch in Space Babies how she comports herself around the babies, we saw it with Lulu Bell in Church of Ruby Road, and also with the Doctor, when he says he can't face one of the Toymaker's legions again. She has an astonishing aptitude for knowing when someone needs comforting, and that's not a skill I have. I think that's incredible skill. Like, if you have someone that in your life, hold on to that person. We could do with more people like that in the world who almost knows, oh, you need me to sit with you, you need a hug, you need me to listen to you right now. Already in 3 episodes, each episode, an incredible moment of this person needs help, and that's a companion thing. But it's turned up to like 11 with Ruby already, and she's very good at like being there for someone. And it's why some people complained about her getting the key at the end of Space Babies, but it made total sense because I'm like, the Doctor knows immediately. Yep, I've chosen very well. Yep, this is someone really worth travelling with. So why am I going to waste time? No, here you go. This key is yours. I love you. Travel with me. Here is the opposite way of looking at it, as he's trying to keep Ruby around so he can keep scanning her. We will see which one it is as the series goes. But yeah, Ruby, like, what a great friend Ruby would be. And the line in Space Babies, it's a great line.
I don't have a boss or taxes or rent or bills to pay. I don't have a purpose or a cause or a mission, but I have freedom. And so I keep moving on to see the next thing and the next and the next. Sometimes it looks even better through your eyes.
And we know why the Doctor goes with companions and benefit to the Doctor, but I'd never heard it phrased like that, as I don't want to just see things with you, but I want to see them the way you see them, because that in turn helps me understand. The idea that the Doctor needs the human to ground them a little bit, and to not get too Gallifreyan. I get a good summation of one of the reasons why you need the companion, why they're critical. Jinx Monsoon, there's a scene, I think it's the scene when she kind of lays out a plan, with when the lights go out and the spotlight and she's behind the piano. And then references of the Toymakers, their dad. And there's that little song, and there's a really, really dark reading of, just like 4 lines, really dark reading of that song. Essentially alluded to the Toymaker might be worse than any dad in the MCU. Like, I heard it and was like, oh, Jesus Christ. I'm like, and it was subtle enough where kids won't get it. But I was like, oh Lord.
Yeah, especially the line, "My daddy."
Yes, that's the line. That's the line.
I was like, oh my God, yeah.
Exactly that line.
Got it.
I was like, oh fuck. Lots of fourth wall breaking. We've seen that quite a bit now. That might be linked to wherever we are right now. Until we didn't have a Mavity inclusion, I don't think, in this episode, but those things feel like of a piece.
There was definitely Mavity and Space Babies, because it was on the screen when they're looking at the planet and stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a Mavity reading. So, but yeah, I don't think we got it in Devil's Chord.
Yeah, but those things definitely seem linked. You mentioned Cherry and Carla Jan. When the TARDIS materializes, it breaks up the ceiling, and I'm just realized that's twice in that same day now that the TARDIS or the Doctor has caused damage to that flat, because it's the same day. It's still Christmas or Christmas Eve.
Interesting. The crack is not there when Ruby calls again. Everything is fine, and we never hear about it.
So I'm guessing they got repaired very quickly, but it is very much like that seems like a joke saying up for later of like you ain't coming in my house anymore because you destroy everything. And just finally, I really actually liked the bit with the resolution, the Devil's Chord, that it wasn't John who plays the keynote or Paul who plays the keynote, but it was both of them. The message being very simple: whether you're a John person or a Paul person or whoever, John and Paul always needed each other. And the greatness comes from them both, rather than John was better than Paul, Paul's better than John. No, they both always needed each other. If you don't have them both, Maestro wins.
And just as a Beatle nerd thing, the chord that they're playing, I'm not sure it's in the right key, but it's actually linking the last chord that's at the end of Day in the Life, which is an E major chord. On the record, there are like 4 people playing pianos. It was John, Paul, Ringo, and their roadie Mal Evans, plus George Martin, the producer, playing it on the Hammond organ. But it's the right chord. And I get the feeling that's like Russell's resonance there and reference note there. It's because a lot of people are arguing is like, oh, it's just a plain chord. It's this and that. No, it's supposed to be Day in the Life. It's obvious to me.
Yeah, I would expect so. Okay, so if we finish up with our MVPs over the 2 episodes, Jan, so your season premiere MVP.
I think it was Jocelyn. I just thought she was like the best in everything that she was doing. I mean, she basically gave up her life, and again, internal logic, we won't discuss that, but she's there and she's taking care of these little kids because everybody else has abandoned them. And she stays on that ship, even though she's just the ship's accountant, doesn't know how to use anything, is banging on the pipes with the spanner, but she's the MVP because without her, the kids would not have survived at all. She was literally willing to die for them so that they didn't have to see her die and that they could live as long as they could go on. So, and without her, we don't have a story at all.
I mean, there is a reading of that's a metaphor for a single mother with a kind of postpartum depression who's overwhelmed and distanced themselves from their baby or babies, and in the end, processes that and is able to kind of be some kind of mother to them again. If I come to your MVP, Chris.
I mean, it's cheating, but I have to say Shooty. It's really fascinating how the character is being written and how he's embodying a character. I mean, I've seen comments saying a doctor's being written too human again, but I like this really open-hearted doctor who doesn't experience the universe with sort of that aloofness of a Time Lord, I mean, he talks about the darkness and acknowledges that, the darkest stuff is his people are gone. He talks about genocide. He talks about all of those dark things, but, he still exudes a joy, like, in the face of that. And I think that really is where the character, as embodied by Shooty, should be, just because he is such a charismatic, lighten up the room kind of guy that you definitely react to that, and you want to hang out with him. You want to be friends with him. You were saying being friends with Ruby as well, but I mean, you want to be friends with this doctor. Like previous doctors, maybe you didn't want to necessarily be friends with him and hang out with him. Like the 12th Doctor's in a grumpy mood, you don't necessarily want to hang out with that guy. But this doctor, you definitely want to hang out with him, learn about the universe, get a nice hug, and see stuff together, see cool things together around the universe.
Yeah, Shooty's also my MVP. There is no way you can, if you're cast as the Doctor, you have the character down after 2 episodes. But if you're doing like a good job, kind of just straight acting, then you can. And I don't mean like sexuality. I mean just in your acting. I'm using straight the way we kind of use the terminology over here. You can still just be a compelling lead presence. And that's what he's being right now. I'm not feeling, after those 2 episodes, any kind of withdrawals of like other Doctors have oh, I miss Jodie, I miss Tennant, I miss Smith, I miss McCoy. None of that. Obviously, it doesn't mean that I'll forget all those past Doctors, but this is the incumbent, and he feels like the incumbent. Also noticeable throughout these 2 episodes, he cries quite a lot. Like, I think I've seen more tears from him in these 2 episodes than in some Doctors' entire tenures, and I think that's him. That, I think, is coming from him. It fits in with some of his stuff, work in Church of Ruby Road as well. Russell's mentioned this, saying that that's what this Doctor is like. Like, the Doctor won't be like this. This Doctor is. This is what Ncuti is bringing to the table as an actor. And on the official Doctor Who podcast, Nadia J made an observation about him.
He is
very
emotional and very vulnerable and happy when he's happy and worried when he's worried. And I feel like I'm feeling the emotions with him.
You do get the feeling, as I mentioned, when he's still in those moments and processing traumatic stuff, that there is still a lot the Doctor's holding back. But whatever the Doctor's feeling in that specific moment, the Doctor's trying to make sure, and Ncuti and his performance are trying to make sure you as the audience feel it too. And that, I think, is coming from the performance. And I wonder if that was the thing that Russell was like, yep, that's why I want it to be him.
It'll be interesting to see, as a Doctor who is confronting a universe with that kind of open-hearted attitude, is it going to be something that ultimately turns out to be a great thing by the end of the season, or is he going to get smacked down a little bit, that maybe he's a little too open-hearted? I'd like to think that it's going to be a positive thing overall for the character throughout the season. I would hate to think that Russell is writing his character in this open-hearted kind of way, only to just smack him down and say, you really shouldn't do that, and you really shouldn't have that open of a heart. You should be a little more closed, because that's not a real good message if you're talking about for kids or young adults. I mean, that's not a great message for them particularly, or for anybody really.
Well, I think that Russell is definitely saying it's a positive, because he's been saying a lot in recent interviews about, he's talking about young people and mental health, and how mental health is actually being discussed now, and people are being more open about things. And I think he's trying to show that it's okay to show your feelings, that it's not the old school British stiff upper lip, we keep everything, buttoned up and we don't put it out. And I think that he is trying to say that you can function. Remember, this is the Doctor who's already been through, he's been through therapy in the wrong order. So he's got some kind of like self-actualization. He's dealing with more than perhaps past incarnations did. And he's okay with it. We don't know what he was doing between, the end of The Giggle and the beginning of Ruby Road. That's a whole nother discussion in terms of the Doctor's timeline and how long he was actually paying attention to Ruby as compared to when he showed up, because having watched those 2 episodes, that and Space Babies again, there's a lot of weird time dilation and like figuring out where the Doctor is. But I do think that the Doctor, this is who he is now, and that's a good thing. And Russell is trying to show as the writer to the audience that it's okay to be that free with your emotions and open with your emotions, and not to be bottling things up and not to be hanging on to stuff. So the only thing we haven't seen the Doctor being angry really yet. And usually that's a one thing. The Doctor gets angry a lot and then grandstands and tells the bad guys off, and we haven't gotten that kind of emotion from him yet. So it'll be interesting to see if we go there.
It's early days. So where I am, like, I thought these 2 episodes were, as a whole, okay, but Ncuti as the Doctor, very encouraging start, and it sets us up for the week to come. So, if you have any thoughts on what we've spoken about today, you can email us at analysingdoctor@gmail.com, and we're also reachable on Twitter and Instagram at analysingdw. Chris, Jan, thank you for both being here.
Oh,
Thanks for having us on the show.
And we will be back next week to analyse Boom. Until next time. Our logo was courtesy of Scott Mattison. His work can be found at planetrisecreative.com and on Twitter at planetrise. Our theme tune is by Mike Mould. We can be reached at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com and on Twitter at analysingdw. Our logo was courtesy of Scott Mattison. His work can be found at planetrisecreative.com and on Twitter at planetrise. Our theme tune is by Mike Mould. We can be reached at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com and on Twitter at analysingdw.